Starmie, Exeggutor, and Alakazam all walk into your bar. Starmie bites off more than they can chew and blacks out early. Exeggutor blows up their ex. Alakazam and some onlookers wonder why they're associated with the other two. You hate all of them, but they drink more than anyone else. Well, not more than anyone else, but your 3 nice stools are always filled, and you need to fill up the rest somehow. I would say that joke sucks in comparison to the last videos, but let's be honest, I've never been funny. But welcome back to another RBY OU discussion, your premier place for conversations about a game from 1998. Back before smartphones, Blu-ray players, and 9/11, the world was a simpler place. But the staples of this metagame have always been pretty consistent. The top 6 are the top 6 for a reason after all. But while they're all wonderful Pokemon in their own right, there is a significant divide. Tauros, Snorlax, and Chansey are all in S tier, or Pokemon which pose a very significant offensive or defensive threat, consistently harming or walling the opposing team. The roles these Pokemon fulfill are crucial, if not mandatory for RBY teams, and these Pokemon are the best at those certain roles. And it's pretty rare to see a serious Gen 1 team not use all 3 of these Pokemon. Tauros is the ultimate wall breaker and revenge killer, capable of being devastating at any point in the game. Snorlax is one of the only Pokemon in Gen 1 that actually have a decent enough move pool to have multiple drastically different but still viable sets. So while you can counter a scouted Snorlax, usually the only safe counter to a new one is your own Snorlax. And Chansey is Chansey, and to steal a clip from Reverend, someone way more talented than I am,
Chansey is very passive, and hence is not necessarily an auto-include, but it does solve the most amount of headaches in the most concise way, so you still do need like a damn good reason not to use it.
Regardless of how I feel about Chansey, you cannot deny what it brings to the table. So yeah, no surprise, the big 3 are in fact the big 3. But what about the other half of the top 6? Where do they fit in this? Well, astute viewers who paused to read this earlier and are disappointed that they wasted their time, for one, join my ex-wife, and for 2, you'll know that they're just below in A rank, which is of course reserved for Pokemon that are outstanding in the RBY metagame. These Pokemon pose a significant offensive or defensive threat to most teams. If these Pokemon have flaws, they are often outshone by their strengths. And yeah, you guys don't need me to tell you that this is clearly true. Starmie, Eggy, and Little Spoon Baby are all incredible Pokemon that are constantly in your face in OU, and they all need luck, brute force, or a good strategy to effectively deal with. But why are they down in A rank and not up in S? Well, it's mostly because each Pokemon is either pretty linear, or has some pretty easy counters. I would say at least one crippling flaw each, unfortunately. And you just can't say that about the big 3. They're all essentially the closest to perfect Pokemon that aren't Mewtwo or Mew1. So, let's go through the little brothers of the big 3. But they're not like the youngest siblings. Those insane souls must be like Slowbro level. So, we're the middle sibling. Or, as you've already read since you clicked on this video, the medium 3. Going on the viability rankings, Starmie is the top not normal type Pokemon in the game. Its dual water psychic type means it not only resists other psychic types, but also equally as important in Gen 1, resists the blizzards and ice beams that fly around everywhere. Taking double damage from electric sucks, and grass can kinda surprisingly be awful sometimes, but overall, this is a pretty good typing for what Starmie does. And Starmie has a few different roles that it can fulfill, such as being a fast psychic endgame sweeper, a bully that can force switches, or as my personal favorite lead. Starmie's great speed allows it to get the drop on nearly any other Pokemon, and its variety of attacking options between Stab Psychic, Thunderbolt, Blizzard, and the more niche Hydro Pump and Surf means it can get super effective damage against the majority of the bracket. And if something's a little bit scary, a good Thunder Wave cripples almost any monster. And don't worry about any damage you take during the process, because Recover is there to solve all of your issues. All this combines to lead us into a terrifying monster of a pocket monster, where it will wipe chunks of your opponent's team with a wider range of strong special moves, cripples anything else with paralysis, and heals off the damage after. So what are these few issues that Starmie has? Well, for one, as one of the few Pokemon that can outspeed Tauros, being paralyzed is awful. Obviously, you can paralyze Tauros back to get the speed advantage, but Starmie isn't super bulky, so you don't want to take too many hits because missing one recover from paralysis can end it all for you. So, even though of course it's an even chance across the entire bracket, the paralysis from Body Slam just always hits harder on Starmie for me. And while electric moves aren't always insanely common in OU, Zapdos, Thunderbolt Chansey, and opposing Thunderbolt Starmies are not uncommon at all. And Thunderbolt Amnesia Snorlax, Thunderbolt Tauros, and Jolteon are still solid threats, if a bit less common. On top of that, while there's a lot of leads that Starmie can trounce, Jinx and the aforementioned Jolteon are the clear and notable exceptions. Any scenario in which you start the match against one of these monsters is a match where you start on the back foot. Jinx by putting either you to sleep, or whatever you bring in trying to deal with it, and Jolteon by just paralyzing us and then zapping us with its thick 25% crit chance. And this last one is less game defining, but also the semi-common Alakazam lead outspeeds us and can paralyze us. Okay, so we have like a few issues, but Starmie is still a great Pokemon. I mentioned that it was my favorite lead, and there's a ton of reasons beyond the surface level stats and moves. And that's because Starmie stole a page from my ex-wife and became a master of psychological manipulation. Starmie is really the only strong psychic type in OU, with a wide enough range of moves that you really never know what coverage it's lacking until you scout it out. Unlike Alakazam, whose only real moves to start a game off with are Thunder Wave, Psychic, and Seismic Toss, Starmie could go for a super effective crit one-hit KO on a ton of Pokemon. Most famously Psychic on Gengar, meaning unless it's a Jinx or Jolteon lead, your opponent is pretty much always going to go for the turn 1 switch, or Thunder Wave, instead of fighting it out. Which we play against ourselves. So like I mentioned, I don't like Chansey that much, and I really enjoy playing without it. It's kind of freeing in a way that it's just like a vibe. Great explanation, I know. But Chansey's ability to eat a turn 1 paralysis is one of its best facets. And as nearly every special attacker's worst nightmare, a turn 1 Chansey switch versus your Starmie is a pretty frequent occurrence. And if it's not, it's something going for paralysis or Thunderbolt. Which means we need to bring in the big guns on the big tree. It's Eggy time. Exeggutor is the me to my ex-wife because it just cleans up whatever mess Starmie has found itself in so well. Let's run through some options. First off, the best case scenario is you bring your Exeggutor in on your opponent bringing in a Chansey, because that gives you a chance to either put Chansey to sleep or at least force it to switch out. If you switch into a Thunder Wave, Exeggutor isn't really faster than a lot of threats that it checks, so it's really not the end of the world. And now your sleeper is protected against counter sleep or the tempting freeze fishing with super effective damage. And obviously with switching into a Thunderbolt, Eggy eats a dozen of those hard-boiled for breakfast. And once it's out, the real fun begins, because it can sometimes just sweep through like half of your opponent's team. Between Sleep, Paralysis, Explosion, and either Psychic, Mega Drain, or the less commonly seen Double Edge, you have a monster of a Pokemon that can force its way in easy, get started fast by putting something to sleep, and then hitting a stun spawn what comes out next, and at least one strong, probably stab move to shake shit up. So like so far, Exeggutor's looking great, and honestly, Eggy's problems are less a problem with Eggy himself, but rather the evolving meta. So traveling back in time a bit, they will always consider a top 4 Pokemon. Starmie taking the spot has been a very recent development, but looking back at the viability rankings from 2013, it is just wild. I mean, Lapras is in A rank, Golem is in B rank, my boy Moltres is nowhere to be seen, just straight disrespectful honestly. However, Exeggutor was as high as the big 3 at one point. But now, 10 years later, it's gone from 3 to 5, and why is that? Well, for one, it's slow as shit. We barely beat the likes of Chansey and Rhydon, and that leads to us taking a beating in order to get our moves off. And that's not great, because while the psychic resist is amazing, taking double damage from ice cripples us. And being super slow means you'll likely need to take a few hits. Unfortunately, more likely if we get paralyzed. Which, mixing with stun spores and sleep powder's only 75% chances to connect, can lead us into some pretty unfortunate situations. On top of that, it's a pretty predictable Pokemon. You know what you're getting into when it comes out, but you can also say that about pretty much every Generation 1 monster. But overall, it'd be foolish to razzle Exeggutor too much. It's probably one of my favorite Pokemon to use. It's just so much fun, because nothing instills fear in someone like an unexpected 4 HP Exeggutor switch-in. And like I mentioned earlier with Starmie, the synergy that this Pokemon has with a fast lead is really magical, and a great counter to the turn 1 Chansey switch when you have a fast, strong, Thunder Wave using Psychic type lead. And guess who's faster, stronger, uses Thunder Wave better, and is Psychic-ier? It's our boy, this fucking dork. Alakazam is definitely a Pokemon. It's good, it's definitely good, but you just kind of expect it to be better. Or maybe that was me when I started playing Gen 1. You always hear, "Oh my god! Did you know the Psychic type in Red and Blue are so broken?" And like, yeah, that's true, but like, when you think of Psychic types in Gen 1, Alakazam is always the first one that I imagine. But, like, objectively, I'd say Starmie is a better Pokemon that does almost the same job that Zamzam does. Not to say they're entirely identical, there are some pretty key differences. For one, while Spoonie is missing some of Starmie's bulk, we beat it in special and speed, solidifying Alakazam's glass cannon presence. And it is a bit easier for them to be a glass cannon than Starmie, as we don't need to worry about double damage from anything as a pure Psychic type in RBY OU. And no, Jolteon Pin Missile doesn't count. Besides that though, pretty much everything about Starmie is a little bit better. Yes, double damage from Thunderbolt sucks, but half damage from Ice Beam and Blizzard is very nice, especially if another Pokemon is already frozen. And while that's definitely a thing Starmie has going for it, the bigger issue for Alakazam is the move pool. You have all the tools you need, don't get me wrong. Recovery, Thunder Wave, Psychic of course, and a fourth move like Seismic Toss or Reflect for support, pretty nice. But it just doesn't hold a candle to Starmie, who gets all of that, plus Blizzard, Thunder, and Hydro Pump. It might hit less hard coming off its lower special, but being able to hit other Psychic types either neutrally or for double damage negates a lot of the effects of Alakazam's good stats. But these two Pokemon are still so good, running them both on the same set is still pretty viable. And sometimes Starmie just doesn't fit your team. Especially if you're running Cloyster or Slowbro, having two water types can lead you to getting wrecked by a late game Zapdos. So while Alakazam is a little bit worse than Starmie, only being a little worse than the fourth best Pokemon in the game is nothing to sneeze at. So we have three Pokemon, three of the actual best Pokemon in the entire game. And even though Alakazam and Starmie kind of fight for a spot, all three have their own niche in the OU meta. Niche. Yeah. Just let me know which one makes you guys less angry. But every serious team typically runs at least one, if not two, or even three of all of these Pokemon. So, the big thing to talk about is how these Pokemon stack up against the rest of the meta as a whole. Y'all should know the routine by now. A crappily made asset with Pokemon sorted into the best bout by whatever arbitrary means I want. And the higher they're ranked, the better matchup that I consider them to be. We'll also be listing what I consider to be each of the three's best damaging move against the rest of the OU threats. And the damaging moves I'm using for the comparison are the most common ones ran for the Pokemon. So for Starmie, while Surf does hit slightly harder, Psychic is ran far more often for the chance to drop your opponent's special stat. Starmie on that note gets Thunderbolt, Psychic, and Blizzard. Eggy gets Mega Drain, Psychic, and Double Edge. Explosion will be considered, but only when it's like an okay trade. Alakazam, of course, basically only gets Psychic and Seismic Toss. So let's get started. Oh, and just to be cute and quirky, let's start at the bottom and work our way up the rankings this time. We are starting off with Slowbro, so of course this is a weird one. Alakazam is basically immediately disqualified as a contender. It can come in, hit a Thunder Wave, and switch into something a little bit more threatening than itself. But that's about it. But that's okay, because both Starmie and Exeggutor are good counters in different ways. Starmie, of course, can hit a Thunderbolt for 40% minimum damage, and with one of the highest crit rates in the game, fishing for that is a pretty effective way of removing Slowbro. However, Thunderbolt isn't on every Starmie. Luckily though, Sleep Powder is on every Exeggutor. And if Sleep isn't an option because it's status already or Sleep Claws, an Explosion is a great way to get past the wall. Even if you don't finish it off with the Explosion, you can bring in something faster and use that to clap it. So, one Pokemon in, and we're already breaking the rules I set up for this ranking. Okay, cool, I love it. Our favorite little zappy dog is up next, and this might be a little controversial, but Pin Missile isn't that good of a move. Only hot takes on this channel, I know. But I don't think that a 4 times damaging move is enough to scare Exeggutor off, especially when Jolteon has other viable options like Rest for the Zapdos matchup or Double Kick to try to cheese Chansey. Jolteon against Starmie is of course a bad time, but I think Exeggutor is better than Alakazam against it still. While Jolteon and Alakazam are both weakened severely by paralysis, Exeggutor can usually take or leave the status, and then retaliate with its own Stun Spore against Jolteon. A pretty decent trade, as sometimes it'll save your Exeggutor from sleep later. Gengar's a Pokemon that's pretty bad against the middle 3, for obvious reasons. All 3 of these Pokemon's Psychics are clean 2-hit KO, 1 hit with a crit. Against a frail Pokemon that mostly wants to mess with physical monsters, Gengar is as terrified of the medium 3 as I am of my ex-wife's lawyers. However, I'm gonna have to put it with Alakazam. Due to Thunderbolt potentially scaring off Starmie, Gengar outspeeding Exeggutor, leading to Chi shenanigans with Confuse Ray and Hypnosis, and Alakazam having the highest crit rate for that sweet potential 1-hit KO. Point Alakazam. Up next is Jinx, and I hate Jinx. Anyone who's watched these videos knows I hate Jinx. And even more than I hate Jinx, Starmie hates Jinx. Starmie has no viable answer to Jinx's Ice and Psychic types, leading to Starmie being asleep for most of, or the entirety of the match, if they're both the leads. Against Exeggutor, the same thing basically happens, except you take double damage from a Stab Blizzard, instead of half damage, so not ideal. You can try to Sleep Powder it, but Jinx outspeeding with either Lovely Kiss or the aforementioned Stab Blizzard leads to a not ideal outcome. And finally, Alakazam being a slightly worse Starmie is really out ahead here, because we have nothing besides Thunder Wave and Seismic Toss to try, which is why it's the best matchup out of all 3. Because out of the entirety of the middle 3, Alakazam should really be the sleep bait. But it is a really bad matchup still, of course. Cloyster's less of a menace than Jinx, honestly. More just like a schoolyard bully. But still, anytime one comes out, a sense of dread comes down my spine, like when I was looking through my ex-wife's phone. Being part Ice-type leads to it being a pretty scary matchup for Exeggutor. On top of double damage, you also usually don't want to waste your Sleep Powder on a monster like Cloyster. Not that Cloyster isn't dangerous, but there's definitely more long-term threats in the game. Meanwhile, Alakazam can paralyze it to nullify Clamp's cheesy potential, and then we can just blast away with Psychic. But Starmie can do the first part just as well. It takes half damage from Cloyster's main damaging moves, and then can turn around and smack it with a Thunderbolt. Easiest pick so far. Zapdos is a fucking monster. It is one of the main reasons that the middle 3 are not rising up to the top 3 anytime soon, because an unchecked Zapdos can just win you the game like nothing else. Against Starmie, you trade Thunder Waves, but Zapdos' agility can nullify the speed drop if you predict it correctly, and then Thunderbolt and Jolpek can ruin Starmie and Exeggutor. Alakazam not taking double damage is nice, but its horrible bulk means that Draw Pet can still get a 3-hit KO, while Psychic takes 4. Of course, not counting turns you spend paralyzed, Psychic drops, Nuclear Wars, crits, or any of the Gen 1 mechanics. It ties with Jinx in a way on my ranking, in that it's best against Alakazam, but it's not a good matchup against Alakazam still. Like, Alakazam is still at a notable disadvantage. But Rhydon is up next, and while Rhydon can tank Alakazam pretty effectively, it has next to no tools to get through Starmie or Exeggutor. Honestly, I could probably be swayed on this, but I just think Starmie is the better matchup, although Eggy does have some advantages, like being able to paralyze Rhydon with Stun Spore, but, like, do you really need to do that? And while Mega Drain does more damage to Rhydon than Starmie's Blizzard, Starmie's ability to recover off the mediocre damage that Rhydon can do makes it just slightly better in my eyes. Alright, and we are approaching the top 6, so let's stop here real quick and examine what we have going on. And oddly enough, Alakazam is in the lead, but are they really? 3 matchups, yes, but like I said, 2 of them are pretty bad. And if I had planned this out enough to add a "Don't fuck with us" category, they probably would have ended up in there instead. So, ignoring that, Exeggutor is also surprising so far because it only has 1.5 matchups to its name. Although that might change with the first mirror match, Alakazam. So, starting us off, Zam versus Zam, not a good time. Not a good time at all. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, really bad time. Like, something 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 my ex-wife level of time here is what I'm talking about. Seismic Toss works, if you're running it, but you're going to need to PP stall versus recover, or you're waiting and hoping and praying for Psychic Special Drops, or of course, the classic, or the 1 in 8 chance to mirror match, move first, Thunder Wave, and then for them to not move that turn, so you can switch into like a Snorlax or a Chansey or anything that's not a Psychic Pokemon with only Psychic to use that really doesn't mind being paralyzed. On that note, Eggy is slightly better, but not by much, as Psychic and Mega Drain barely work against Alakazam, although the more niche Double Edge is pretty decent. Obviously you can Explode or put Alakazam to sleep, but unless it's acting as a late game sweeper, there's usually better Pokemon to use those moves against. Which is why Starmie is usually the best option. You can obviously get slapped by the Thunder Wave and that sucks, but you can retaliate with Thunder Wave of your own. And more importantly, Blizzard Freeze Fishing versus Alakazam is very viable, as Starmie's great crit rate plus hitting Zam neutrally means it'll have to spend a lot of turns healing and hopefully paralyzed. Obviously Psychic drops can make this harder, so it's not like perfect at all, but it's still one of Starmie's better fishing baits. For this reason, I'll tie Starmie with Exeggutor. Again, it really depends on when Alakazam comes out to play and how well prepared you are to handle it. And Eggy, okay, this one is pretty easy to understand. Let's go to Starmie next. Okay, no, that was a joke. As anyone who watched my Venusaur video learned, Eggy versus Eggy is a really awkward matchup. You're just trying to put the other Exeggutor to sleep so you can switch out, you're really trying to cheese Psychic drops, or you're going for the Nuclear option. And with the speed tie, it's really up to luck how this one goes. So yeah, Exeggutor versus Exeggutor is pretty bad. Alakazam can't do literally anything towards the big lug either. Thunder Wave and Seismic Toss can only get you so far, although like I mentioned earlier, Sleep and Kaboom do have better targets if you can help it. Starmie though, that is the troublemaker yet again. Blizzard is a 3-hit KO, not counting crits, but the problem is that even with a crit, you can't 1-hit KO Eggy from full health. Meaning you are always risking eating Sleep or trading your Starmie with an Explosion. And, unlike Alakazam, Starmie is a great, high-value target for Eggy's Explosion. And as a result, it's a bit of a tight matchup, as you either need to chip it ahead of time, or risk one of your best Pokemon. So let's flip that last one on its head. Starmie versus Eggy is better for Starmie than it is for Eggy, but only slightly. Like I said, a full health Exeggutor has little to worry about, and can always aim for a Sleep, or trade with Explosion. But your opponent can play around that by either having another Pokemon already asleep, or more actively, switching out on a predicted explosion to something like Rhydon or Gengar, so you are risking a lot on it. Meanwhile, Starmie just has to hit 2 or 3 blizzards, and it just ruins their life. And backtracking to Alakazam again, Starmie's a pretty decent counter to Zamzam as long as you're willing to wait it out. Starmie versus Starmie though, is fucking intense. Thunderbolt has about as much of a chance as being used on Starmie sets as it doesn't, and a Starmie with Thunderbolt will almost always completely trounce one without it. Or, you get the absolutely psycho Chad horsecock monsters who use Thunder, which will always one-hit KO another Starmie with a crit. So, you know, anyone who can do this, and send me a link, I will emo you a picture of my ass. Anyway, whoring myself out over the internet aside, what's up, Cecile? Starmie is another tie between Starmie and Exeggutor, but, like, it's a scarier matchup for both Pokemon than Alakazam is, so I think this fits. Maybe yell at me in the comments if you're mad at this. And, alright, we are almost done. Breathe, guys, gals, and everyone else. We got this. Big 3 versus the Medium 3. Let's go, go, go! Chansey. Chansey is a fucking nightmare. Let's just be honest, we all know this. Starmie and Alakazam just don't have the tools to get past it, besides Psychic Drops versus a final wall Chansey, or Starmie Freeze Fishing, but Chansey can fish right back, or fry it with Thunderbolt also. Nothing here is a good idea, and usually a team without a solid physical attacker can't win a game versus a team with a Chansey still alive. Or at least a strong physical attack. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Exeggutor actually has this really cool, strong physical attack move. It's called Explosion, and it does some neat shit. Yeah, this one's obvious. Snorlax is definitely a pretty big problem for most Pokemon, but these 3 are really some prime Amnesia-lax setup monsters, or Self-Destruct-lax goodbye marks. Really, the moveset of a Snorlax is going to be the most impactful, so it's going between Alakazam and Exeggutor, as Alakazam's higher crit rate and stronger Psychic are decent tools to boost it above Starmie. Meanwhile, being able to explode on Snorlax or put it to sleep potentially as Exeggutor is amazing. Snorlax is one of the best sleep targets in the game after all. Besides maybe Tauros, of course. The final boss monster of Gen 1 OU. The Chad King. The guy who peaked 25 years ago in high school and still yells at the Buffalo Wild Wings server. Tauros. It is honestly just a terrifying Pokemon to be up against. That being said, all of our middle 3 Pokemon are still good, in that paralyzing your opponent's Tauros and dying immediately after is still a good trade, probably more often than it's not, but in my opinion, Exeggutor is the best, because if you're waiting on sleep until the late game, usually that means Tauros is going to be your target. It's much frailer than Snorlax, giving it less time to wake up before you can beat it. On the other hand, a paralyzed Tauros can be bullied by Alakazam or Starmie, as long as you're recovering the damage from Body Slam, of course, although you're risking crits and Body Slam paralysis, so sleep is truly the best option. And Explosion is the second best option, so Exeggutor wins this one. And let's look back on the list and reflect slacks about it. I'm sorry. Anyway, the matchups. So on paper, this is pretty fair, but let's just make this a little bit more honest. And yeah. Okay, so there's clearly a bit of a bias here. Starmie and Exeggutor are both holding on to 3 apiece, and also sharing 3. All pretty viable matchups. Alakazam has 3 of their own also, and shares one with Exeggutor. But 2 of these 3 are really only here out of requirements, so it's more like 1 and 1. And Snorlax is really pretty evenly countered by Starmie, as it is by Alakazam on any set that isn't running Thunderbolt, which could also be said of Gengar, although Gengar does admittedly run Thunderbolt more often than Snorlax does. So unfortunately, Alakazam is kind of outclassed by Starmie, while Exeggutor is pretty safe as a different class of Pokemon entirely. Alakazam of course isn't bad, but even in my own experience, it's hard for me to want to run Alakazam over Starmie on any team recently. With the changing meta also, the reliance on fast psychic types spamming paralysis days, while certainly still present, are clearly slowing down, leading to less and less Alakazam usage over time. And it's been said before, but I think it's worth asking as one final segment of this video, but if not Alakazam, who would be the number 6 Pokemon? Well, the clear option would be the number 7 Pokemon, Rhydon. Rhydon is a great Pokemon, a staple of OU since cartridge days. The ability to resist Thunder Wave, stab Earthquake and Rock Slide, and substitute to stick around, Rhydon is an amazing Pokemon that I don't think should be number 6. Now, don't get me wrong. I honestly think Alakazam is a little worse than Rhydon personally, but the 4 times damage to water is so terrifying with Starmie so embedded in the high tier meta, and switching Thunderbolt over to Surf would be pretty easy if Rhydon got even more common than it is now. Or extra Slowbros, and god, no. I hate any Slowbro user that isn't me. Instead, I'd say the best hypothetical new number 6 Pokemon would be Zapdos. This video is long enough as it is though, so let's do a little bet. I'm Vane, and like seeing numbers go up, and also, hey, hi, this is the first video I've made since the Bob's Burgers one, and wow, that took off! And so did the rest, like, this is gonna have way more views, and I'm terrified of that to be honest, but okay, here we are. Anyway, the point of what I'm talking about right now is, at this point in writing the script, I am at 325 subscribers. So, if we can double that, and hit 650, I'll do a Zapdos video. Weird ass number, I know, but I'd love if we can get to that point by like the fall or summer. Honestly though, I started the year at like 40 subs only, so it might be coming up way faster than I expect. And that is terrifying in a way that I cannot comprehend right now. Anyway, yeah. The middle 3 are, and have always been, tier-defining threats in the meta. Each one is a major threat to be up against, and need very specific tools and strategies to remove. Or a lot of luck. They have a history and honor about them that I hope that I did justice in this video. And to any Alakazam stands out there, I'm sorry if I came off a little harsh. It's just that compared to Starmie, Alakazam is a little bit worse off, but being slightly less rich than a billionaire, or slightly more married than I am now, sounds great. These are all amazing Pokemon, and they will likely stay as meta threats for the rest of time. I hope in a few years, once I'm officially Pokemoned out and need a break, I can come back to this program, back to Showdown, back to the old games, and hopefully all my old friends will still be there waiting for me. Maybe the meta will evolve, where Alakazam is the end-all be-all best middle 3 Pokemon of all time. If that happens, and you see me though struggling to figure out the game all over again, make sure to say hey. Until that point though, this was me talking for far too long about RBY's middle 3. And I'll catch y'all next time.